It is Sunday evening. I hop into my work email and there is a calendar invite from my manager that just says Neha Andre Sync. And I'm like, this is sort of weird because he usually doesn't send me one-off meetings. We have a reoccurring one-on-one. So this was super odd. And there was no context in the meeting. It was just sync. And it was for Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. My mind at this point is freaking out. And the rational side of me is saying, okay, Neha, relax, don't catastrophize, things are gonna be fine. I have trouble sleeping that night, and then at 8:25, I log into Teams, and just as I'm about to get into the meeting, I see that there is someone who was not on the calendar invite already in there, and so I hover over her name, and it says Senior HR Director. And at that point, I'm like, holy shit, Neha, like, you either have done something really wrong, or you're getting laid off. At that point, I just clicked enter, and immediately my manager started reading from a script. He said, hello, we are sorry to inform you that your role has been terminated, blah, 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 blah. So a lot of people are curious about what it means to be laid off. So for me, my layoff date was October 17th, and then I had 2 weeks of access to internal company resources, to the org chart, to internal teams and email. And then I'm still considered an employee 2 months out from my layoff date. So for me, that would be December 16th since my layoff period was October 17th. On top of that, Microsoft gave me a severance package. The severance package is determined by effectively how long you were at the company. So I've been there for 4 years, and for context, I got 4 weeks of base pay. The way that they calculate it is they give you 1 week of base pay for every 6 months of regular service, up to a max of 39 weeks, and then they reduce it by 0.2 weeks for each business day in the period that you're paid as an employee. With Microsoft, they're going to give me 6 months of my health insurance as it is now. I'm on a high deductible plan, I don't pay premiums, and so that's going to continue for 6 months, and they're going to take care of paying all of the premiums, which is really generous because the premiums are about anywhere between $650 to $750 per month, and they're going to cover that. So that means effectively I have 6 months of health insurance for free until about July. For stock vesting, I get 6 months of that, and then whatever vests during that 6-month period vests, and then everything else I lose, which is honestly a lot. You get some other benefits. There's some career coaching stuff that comes with it, but I don't know how good that'll be, honestly. I will soon receive a box where I ship my laptop back, so don't expect to keep that. My vacation days will get paid out, which is good. Not all of them, but some of them. And then everything I use as an employee, I can keep until December 16th, even though I was laid off in October. So the legal services, the mental health services, I'll have access until December. In terms of how long I will be paid until, again, I'm an employee until December, and then I get my severance after that. So for me, I'll be paid until January 16th, even though I got laid off on October 17th. The most frustrating thing about this is that things were going really well with my manager and I, right? Every one-on-one we had, he said, Neha, I love how much initiative you're taking. Not only are you doing what you need to, but you're going above and beyond. In our last rewards conversation, he gave me the most increase in salary that really is possible. We had a conversation about promoting me in December. It's like every indication that I had was that I was doing well, I was doing what I needed to do, my rewards were showing it, and then this happens. So it's just frustrating how completely blindsided I was by it. The funny thing is that 3 months earlier, I'm working and then I get a ping from my manager and he says, hey Neha, can you chat for a few minutes? And back then, I also got scared. I was like, oh man, is he gonna lay me off? But I hopped into the chat and he said, listen, we had to let go of these people in our team. And this was in the July layoff. And I mean, honestly, I was really upset and sad. Those people were phenomenal workers and did not deserve to get laid off. But I didn't think too much of it. I just kind of assumed that I was safe for another year. I mentally remember thinking this. I was like, all right, I didn't get laid off. I made the cut. I have at least another year. And I even mentally said, okay, maybe in 6 months I'll start interviewing because I don't want to be a part of a company that's reducing their workforce. That means they're not growing, right? I made the mistake of assuming that there wouldn't be more layoffs. And I think now I'm a lot less naive about that. But the future company that I'll work at, I truly know that they don't know, the managers don't know, the leadership doesn't know, because honestly, these decisions come from oftentimes 3 or 4 levels above them, right? Some exec decides, hey, we don't need this product anymore, or hey, we don't need this team anymore. And then that entire team loses their job. I was talking to a friend who got laid off, and that's exactly what happened in his case. Basically, everyone in his org, up to his VP, lost their job. One of the most disappointing things is that I was on a team that I thought was safe. I was on Azure, which is a huge money-making machine for Microsoft. We thought we were safe. Our product was responsible for 50% of the revenue of cloud migration deals. So we were important, right? We weren't the, freaking Windows Phone. And I mean, no shade to the Windows Phone. I mean, maybe a little shade, but yeah, we did contribute to the company. And so, yeah, apparently it wasn't enough. At the end of the day, I don't think that you can predict who's going to get cut or what team. I think it really does depend on which person is making the decision. That being said, I think there are some trends that I've seen. Take all of this with a grain of salt because it's just my opinion, not definitive data-driven information. But I have noticed that a lot more non-technical roles are being affected than technical roles. It might be more likely to be laid off if you're in a PM or a marketing or a writing role rather than a software engineering role. But again, that doesn't always hold. My role was pretty technical and yet still got laid off. Another commonality is if your role is costing the company money or is not producing revenue, if it's a part of a speculative investment, maybe they're trying to test out a new feature that doesn't yet produce revenue, or maybe a product that is weaning in growth. So for example, for Microsoft, the Internet Explorer team at Microsoft did have layoffs. So any declining product like that might be affected more than others. The other thing that's interesting is that on my team, the newest members were cut on the team. I've also heard in other layoffs that the most senior person on the team is laid off because they're getting paid a bunch of money. So it sounds like it could go either way. If you think probabilistically, the likelihood of you getting laid off is low. But I'm just saying, if you are in an organization or a company that is really hurting, personally, I think it's better to jump ship beforehand so that you have control and it's not them pushing you out. It can be really unclear who decides who gets laid off. I've spoken with other hiring managers and there seems to be more layoffs coming, at least for Microsoft, although no one really knows for sure. So that's why I made these videos, because we need to start having conversations about what it's like, what to expect for folks who still have jobs, what they can do differently. This video is if you still have a job, learning from things that I wish I had done differently, things that I've learned. And then there's a second video for folks who have already gotten laid off about actionable things you should do during your 2 weeks of access, questions to ask your manager, just the emotional stuff that we went through. If you have any friends who got laid off, definitely send them that video. It's like at least 4 or 5 hours of research that I did that I hope that they don't have to do. What I've heard talking to 5+ senior people at Microsoft is that there seems to be different types of layoffs. One where there truly are decisions that are made multiple levels high and there just isn't that much control over who gets laid off or not. And then there's the other type of decision where it really does come down to maybe your boss and your boss's boss deciding who on the team gets laid off. You're never going to get laid off without your manager knowing about it beforehand. Your manager needs to approve the final list. And so if you got laid off, it means that your manager probably did not fight for you the way that you think they might. And if they did, then they would tell you that. In my case, I'd heard from another manager on a previous team that when he had heard about my layoff, he went to his boss's boss trying to see if there was anything that could have been done to reverse the role or get me into a different team. He told me what he did to advocate for me. So if your manager has not told you that he did those things, most likely he hasn't. The other thing to consider is that a lot of managers have a very non-confrontational personality, and so that just means that if your name's on the list, they're just not the type of personality to go to bat for you. And that's just, again, the reality. We had one member on our team, Alan, who was just extremely knowledgeable about the code base, and him and my manager were just a covalent bond. You could not separate them. Alan had worked with my manager on this product for over 7 years, and he knew it inside and out. He knew what needed to be changed. He could educate people about it. He could talk so deeply about the nuances of the legacy code. Fundamentally, Alan was irreplaceable. And I don't think that you can predict or prevent a layoff, but if there is someone who I think is the least likely, it is someone who is that level of irreplaceable. So I think if you're looking for tips If you want my honest answer, work on being irreplaceable. The problem with that advice is that no one can really do that on the spot, right? It just takes years of cultivating that. He had been working on that product for a long, long time. And in this case, the newest members were cut. The thing about Alan is that he was incredibly irreplaceable, and as a result, he was oftentimes really rude to other team members. And this was common knowledge. Everyone kind of knew that he was prickly and oftentimes criticized certain ideas. The reason I bring this story up is to show the power of being irreplaceable. And this is a bad example because a good manager, in my opinion, would have talked to Alan and said, listen, I know you are extremely valuable to the team, but we're getting complaints from X, Y, and Z person, and that's not okay. But because this person was so irreplaceable, he got away with a lot of things that I think a lot of people wouldn't. And yeah, that was just the reality. So anyway, that's a depressing view of being irreplaceable. But my point here is that I don't think you can prevent a layoff. I don't think you can prevent your name from getting on the list. But if there was one thing that you could do, it would be being irreplaceable. I know that's not very actionable, and I know that's not satisfying. But there are a few things that I think are actionable and that I wish I had done. Recently, I was on a different organization, and we had a reorganization and moved to a completely different part of the business under a completely different team. My fatal mistake was I should have put a meeting invite on my boss's calendar just so that they know my name and that they know that I add value to the team. And I'm just the type of person that I do my work, I do it well, and I don't think about some of this business, politic type stuff. And maybe that was my fatal mistake. And if there is something you should take away from this, it's to do that, right? Get 30 minutes of time on your boss's calendar, and you can frame it from a position of, hey, I'm Eduardo, I'm on your team, I really want to understand your career trajectory from here to here. Would you have 30 minutes to talk? No worries if not. And then get into that meeting and just really be likable, show your value, ask them if there's any other area of the business that you could help in. At the end, they really like you, they like your initiative. At that point, say, hey, this was amazing, I'm gonna go work on XYZ. Any chance I could meet with you in 2 or 3 months for 30 minutes to just tell you how it's going? And 30 minutes in 2 or 3 months is very little time that you're asking for, and I think most people would say yes, even at your boss's level or 3 levels up. You could even pitch it as getting their feedback on an initiative that they care about. So if you hear them constantly talking about XYZ initiative, walk them through ways it could be improved or something like that. If you're like me, I know your instinct is to just do your work and just hope things will work out. I think in this environment, it doesn't hurt to try. And the logic behind that is that oftentimes these layoffs come from not your manager, but your manager's manager. And so you want them to look at a list of people and think, that's a human that I'm laying off, versus, oh, that's just a name. And the only way you do that is by cultivating a relationship with them. There's a second thing I wish I had done. You know how when we work, we just meet people and have a good time, we finish the project, and then we just don't really keep in touch with them? This has happened to me a lot because I've worked here for 4 years, and there's a lot of people who really like me, and I just didn't cultivate that relationship. And if I were to go back while I wasn't laid off, I would just set up a 30-minute catch-up sync with all of my past colleagues and just do that every 2 or 3 months. The reason why is because I think relationships and networks are fruit trees, in the sense that you really need to water them over time and cultivate them before you go to them for help, right? If you go to them after 3 years of silence and you say, hey, do you know of any job postings? It's kind of awkward, and it's kind of like you asking for a favor versus them just helping a friend. My manager has said, at least at Microsoft, that you can come back, there's no stigma, and that in some cases the hiring recruiters will try and expedite the interview for you. I have not verified that per se with my experience. What I've actually found is contrary to that company line. What Microsoft does, and I think what a lot of tech companies do, is as soon as they lay off employees, they effectively put a hiring freeze on roles. And part of that could be for liability protection. When you lay off an employee, that hiring manager cannot hire another person for that position. Otherwise, they effectively open themselves up to a lawsuit. My experience has been that there are a ton of openings, but when I went in and researched if they were truly open, it turns out that a lot of those positions were frozen. And there's also a stigma attached to being laid off, so you will likely have to prove to the new hiring manager that there wasn't something wrong with your performance. And the best way I would recommend doing that is talk to your current manager and say, listen, this business decision that Microsoft has made or your company has made will affect my ability to get another job. If I go to Google or Amazon or any other company, I have to tell them that I got laid off. And that hiring manager might wonder, hey, was it a performance issue? Something that me and my manager are doing now is every time I have a successful interview with a hiring manager, I will basically reply a thank you letter to that hiring manager, and then I'll CC my current manager. And my manager will send a template that I made that says, oh, Neha's great, basically endorsing me to that hiring manager so that they know that it's not performance related. And then I'm also going to send them copies of my performance reviews, which were all, wonderful. I also include contact information for my past two managers who can speak to my abilities. So that is how you avoid getting blacklisted. The reality is there is a stigma and you will have to overcome it. But generally, yes, you can absolutely come back to the company. I know at Microsoft, there were people who got laid off and came back later. One thing you have to be really careful about is that if you get another offer from another Microsoft team during the time that you were laid off but you're still an employee, regardless of whether you accept it or not, you lose your severance package. So for me, that would be December 16th since my layoff period was October 17th. The reason they give you a severance package is because they're saying, hey, look, it's not you, it's not a performance issue, we screwed up, and so we're going to give you this package because of that. So for example, if you've worked there for 10 years, you have a lot of money in that package. For me, it's only about a month's worth of base pay, so it's perhaps smaller. I would probably take an offer from another team over 1 month of base pay, but that is a strategic decision that you should make. Ideally, you talk to your hiring manager who's writing you the new offer and say, hey, listen, can you write this offer and give it to me December 17th or 18th after you officially stop being an employee. The cool thing about severance and unemployment is that you can collect them at the same time. The severance bonus is paid as a lump sum, and then I can just collect unemployment whenever my unemployment date hits, effectively. I did try and negotiate the severance package, but it was extremely difficult. They make it really hard to get in touch with someone in HR. They give you a phone number and an email, and the phone number is someone in the Philippines who has very little context for US labor laws and the context of being laid off, and so they weren't able to answer some of my questions there. So just be prepared to be given a runaround with HR if you did want to talk to them and ask questions and stuff. And then just to give you some context about layoffs at other companies, I have another friend who got laid off at a tech company much smaller, but you know the name, and he got 3 weeks of access, but many of the people underneath him, they didn't get access at all. They just had to leave the day of. They weren't able to check their emails. They just had to leave. Because he was higher up, he had 3 weeks, and then he's getting paid 10 weeks on top of that. And then they're giving him health coverage at the same coverage that he had before for about 4 months or so, beyond the 10 weeks. And then for him, I think they're partially accelerating his stock vest. Can you trust your manager with information about whether you should be worried about a layoff or not? Before my layoff, there was a layoff 3 months ago, and I remember being scared at that time, and I said, all right, let me just check in and ask if there are going to be any more that I should be worried about. And I asked my manager not once but 3 times in different meetings. Other team members asked my manager's manager, and the answer was universally no. And that was obviously wrong because I got laid off. What I've learned is that you can't trust leadership with those questions. And it's not because they're lying to us or because they have bad intentions. That's not it at all. It's just that they oftentimes don't know themselves and they're guessing themselves. And even if they knew for sure that the answer at that moment was no, there won't be more layoffs, some executive can decide otherwise. And it's the kind of decision that even if my manager wanted to push back against, he would not be able to, because he is completely powerless compared to his boss's boss, who might have given the directive. I was naive and I believed the leadership. And if there's one takeaway from this, I think it's that in tough economic conditions, businesses will do what they need to do to turn a profit. And that's just the reality of the time that we're in. And that's okay, right? Because on the flip side, we as employees are allowed to walk away at any time, right? We can screw them over in the way that they can screw us over. And there's some equality in that. I was talking to a friend who was recently laid off from a small startup, and she said that she got laid off, and then 2 weeks later, the boss that laid her off got laid off himself. And of course, he had no idea, right? And it just goes to show that no one really knows. The person who you see as the most indispensable may very well be dispensable, especially if they decide to cut out a full product line. When I got laid off, I made a point of just setting up meetings with everyone who I worked with. And there was one person in particular comes to mind where I hopped into the meeting with her and she just immediately shared her screen and started saying, okay, listen, in my organization, there's this role open, there's that role open, we're gonna get you a new job. We literally started going through the org chart and identifying roles that I could be a part of and talked about interview stuff. And then she said, Neha, let's set up a one-on-one sync. I'm gonna refer you to all of these roles. And I was just blown away by her kindness and her sincerity and just her going above and beyond, right? It really touched my heart. Now she permanently has a special place in here that if and when I can help her out, I will go above and beyond for her too. It was just a moment of realizing there's 3 things that people will never forget you for, and it's work stuff, helping with children, or helping with health. And if you can help someone who's in a tough situation with either of those 3 areas, then you're just giving back to them in a way that is just irreplaceable. In terms of what you could do on an actionable level, instead of saying, how can I help? She just helped. And so if it were me on the receiving end, I would say all those things, but then afterwards check in with my friend, hey, listen, these are the open roles in my team or in my company. Let's hop on a call and figure out which ones to apply to. Then I would tell my friend, okay, how about we do some interview practice next week? And then they're going to feel a lot more comfortable asking you for help because you're the one leading it. Just do that for your friends. It'll go so far, so far. There's a second video for folks who have already gotten laid off about actionable things you should do during your 2 weeks of access, questions to ask your manager, just the emotional stuff that we went through. If you have any friends who got laid off, definitely send them that video because it's like at least 4 or 5 hours of research that I did that I hope that they don't have to do. I think this process has really helped me see who my advocates were in the company too. I had a manager who really went to his boss and his boss's boss and stirred up a ruckus, and I honestly didn't even realize he was that much of an advocate for me, and I really appreciate that, and I'm gonna do everything I can to help him out as well and do what I can to return the favor. Right now there are 2 types of companies that are hurting. There's the big tech companies that are currently missing their earnings, and the startups that just are not funded or not living up to the amount of growth that investors expect of them, and they are also struggling. There is a third class of startups that are still thriving. It's a very small group, but if you can research and find startups that are growing rapidly, I would highly recommend working for them rather than these big tech companies that have prestige but are laying people off. I have a friend that works at one. I mean, they exist. You have to put your due diligence into finding them. You're probably not going to get paid as much as a big tech company, and you do take on the risk of that startup not going anywhere in the long term. But if they are truly growing and if they are truly hiring, you will come in at a position that will ultimately make it much easier to rise up the ranks. In a year, you could be a lead of a team or of multiple teams. So the acceleration of your career will be much faster than trying to go for a big tech company that is just stalling or even laying people off. Listen, guys, I know this is not the most uplifting video, but I hope it was helpful. I would really appreciate if you subscribed. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope this helped. Thanks. Bye.